Welcome to our new episode on Pentecost. Today we'll reflect on I am the resurrection and the life. Have you ever noticed life throws you curveballs? Things don't seem to always go the way you had hoped or planned. Perhaps through no fault of your own, your life seems to be sidetracked, or perhaps you are not where you thought you would be right now at this stage of your life. Some of the big side trackers can be an illness, a relationship gone sour, marriage problems, unexpected death of a loved one, job loss, unforeseen bills, just to name a few. These can cause to worry, be discouraged, and lose hope. I hope these two stories we read will change the way you look at life's curveballs, because no matter how much life gets off track for us from our viewpoint, even if we've messed up our whole life, there is hope in the resurrection, because nothing is impossible for God. In our first story, Jesus' friends Martha and Mary sent a messenger to Jesus to let him know about their brother Lazarus, who was sick. In fact, by the time Jesus received the message, Lazarus was probably already dead. However, rather than rushing back to the town of Bethany to be with Martha and Mary, Jesus continued his ministry for 2 more days before going to see them. By the time he had arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days. When Jesus was at the edge of town, Martha heard of Jesus' arrival and went to greet him. And the first words out of her mouth were, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." On the one hand, her statement indicates her faith in Jesus' ability to heal. "If you were here, Jesus, surely you would have healed Lazarus." But also implied in her statement is the question, "Why didn't you come when we told you our brother was sick? Where were you, Jesus?" Events did not happen the way Martha and her sister Mary anticipated they would. In her mind, she must have thought, surely Jesus will show up and save the day. He will make everything better. He will heal my brother. But that isn't what happened. Jesus didn't make it to Bethany in time. In fact, Jesus purposefully delayed his trip 2 extra days, as he wouldn't show up until the 4 days after Lazarus' death. Life was not going the way Martha had hoped. Her brother wasn't supposed to die. After all, he was Jesus' good friend. How could Jesus allow something like this to happen to his friend? Even her expectations of Jesus were shattered because Jesus did not do what Martha thought he would. I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life when I have wondered, "Jesus, why have you allowed this to happen to me? I thought you were my friend and that you cared about me." Sometimes it feels as though God has let us down. Even if we may have deserved what we received, we still think God will help us out somehow. Yet God doesn't always respond in the way we expect. In the second reading, we recount the events on the 2nd day after Jesus' own death. Instead of dying of sickness, though, Jesus was intentionally killed. You know the story. Jesus was arrested by the religious leaders while praying in the Garden of Gethsemane at the Mountain of Olives, betrayed by one of his own disciples. And the religious leaders wanted Jesus dead because he called God his Father. He even made himself equal with God. In their ears, this was blasphemy. It was like speaking profanities about God, and they believed he deserved death. After a shame of trial, they brought Jesus to the Roman governor Pilate and flogged Jesus 39 times with a lead or ceramic stripped whip. As you can imagine, most people didn't survive this, for it wasn't enough for the crowd. They wanted Jesus to be sentenced to death. "Crucify him," they cried. And so Jesus was sentenced to death, carrying his own cross through the streets of Jerusalem to Golgotha, He was nailed to it and crucified between two criminals. After 6 hours, from 9 to 3 p.m., of hanging on the cross, Jesus died. Two wealthy followers of Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, took his body and placed it in a newly cut tomb, never used before, and a huge stone was rolled to seal the tomb. Again, a curveball, only this time it was Jesus' followers, his friends, who were sidetracked. They expected a king and they got a martyr. Events didn't go as they planned, and Jesus was supposed to become king. He was the Messiah, the Son of God. But Jesus had died and their lives were sidetracked. I'm sure they were wondering, what are we going to do now? In both situations, life was not going as they had planned. From their viewpoint at the time, it seemed as though God's plan had failed or that it had been derailed. Fortunately, we know neither of these stories end there, do they? In both cases, Jesus did something so incredible, no one expected it. They didn't even see it coming. Jesus brought hope that God had planned something better for their life. God's plan was not sidetracked at all. God was going to use that situation to reveal His glory. In the movie The Passion of Christ, my favorite scene is where Jesus is carrying the cross on the way to Golgotha on the Via Dolorosa. Jesus stumbles and his mother Mary comes before him and holds him, and they do a flashback to his childhood when Mary picked him up after he had fallen. And he says to his mother, "I make all things new." This event is not recorded in the Bible, but the words he said are true. Jesus brings hope in even the bleakest situation because he makes all things new. In the first story, Jesus said to Martha, "Your brother will rise again." Jesus did not see Lazarus' death as God's derailed plan. Rather, Jesus knew God had a better plan all along. There was hope. Unfortunately, Martha misunderstood what Jesus was saying. She thought Jesus was saying one of those comforting words you say to people at a funeral, like, "We can rejoice because they are with the Lord now." What Jesus meant was,